Very quickly.
Yes.
Yesterday, the Secretary of State said that Israel was under siege. What did he mean by that? Because, unless he has his geography mixed, it is Gaza that is under siege.
Saeed.
Right.
Israeli citizens, as we've talked about for weeks, live under fear of rockets fired by Hamas. We've talked about when the Secretary and President were on the phone with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the air raid sirens going off in the background, having to go into bunkers. No citizen in Israel should have to live under that kind of threat, and Israel does have a right to defend itself. You also heard the President speak today about the rising number of Palestinian civilian deaths and the loss of Israeli lives. So I think it's very clear what we mean when we say that.
I understand his empathy and sympathy to the Israeli Prime Minister who had to run to a bunker. But don't you think that the Palestinians were also subject to a lot of
I think there is no excuse whatsoever.
There is no comparison.
There is no excuse for what Hamas is doing, period.
Is there an excuse for what Israel is doing, bombing with F-16? You just
Let's do one at a time, please.
Hold on one second. You just talked about how the Russians are responsible for whatever weapons that the separatists are using. What about Israel that is using American weapons day in and day out? Tanks, airplanes, F-16 bombs, and so on, to kill basically a lot of civilians.
Saeed, Israel has a right to defend itself, period. They have a right to defend itself from rockets fired from Gaza, from things smuggled from tunnels into Israel, period.
And should the Palestinians be given the same kind of courtesy to defend themselves?
First of all, nothing that Hamas is doing has any justification at all, period. Even bringing it up in that context is offensive.
Okay.
But stepping back, the president...
Let me finish,
Saeed.
You talked about
Saeed.
how offensive. Isn't it offensive that 100 civilians were killed in one night?
I'm going to move on if you're not going to let me answer. James,
go
ahead.
Go ahead.
No, James, go ahead.
Two things.
You don't get any more questions if you don't let me answer.
Along the lines of the issue